12:30 on November 3rd. We can call to order this regular meeting of the Reading Board of Education. The first item of business is approval of the minutes of the October 5th, 2021 regular Reading Board of Education meeting. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns about the meeting minutes? Hearing none, we'll deem them approved by unanimous consent. Move on to item 3 of the agenda, public comment. Any members of the public wishing to be heard? Mike.
Mike D'Agostino, Glen Hill Road. So yeah, as I said at the tri-board meeting, I think it's appropriate to thank the members of the Reading Board who will not be returning for their service to the community. And I also wanted to make sure, I know it's been a long-standing practice that we give these glass apples, these crystal apple kind of things was what we used to give. I think there's like 1,000 of them at Central Office. And I want to make sure, because we gave Mr. Hocker one at Region 9, I wanted to make sure he didn't think he's getting like a whole bucket. He's giving him these apples, you know.
I'm collecting them. They're on eBay.
But no, seriously, I did want to thank the members, you know, Heather for all of her work, and for Mr. Hocker, and for Colleen, and for John. There's a big turnover, and so your leadership will be missed, and I just wanted to thank you for all you've done for the district. And then I'll end with lunch is free. Take advantage of it.
There is such a thing as a free lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Other public comments? Seeing none, move on to board member comment. And I'll take my own initiative to sort of make some remarks first, in keeping with what Mike started with. Service on a Board of Education is, in the best of times, a thankless but necessary job. Boards of education are working boards. We make policies, set budgets, and work closely with administration to ensure that schools are well governed, to make efficient use of the resources our town allocates for their maintenance. From time to time, school boards face difficult decisions with no clear winning solutions and a guarantee that some constituency will be upset. It comes with the territory. Ordinarily, these disputes are limited to changes to programs or staff that are near and dear to the community. These past 2 years, however, have been anything but ordinary. Over that time, this board has worked to answer the call of challenges no one has anticipated. No one signs up to be a pandemic school board member. No one signs up to be a pandemic school board member ensnared in culture wars. I can say with great confidence that every member of this board has worked hard over the past 2 years to do what they see as best for the children of this community and for the health and safety of the students and staff that fill the halls of these schools. Over the past 2 years, we have held countless Zoom meetings, worked with 3 superintendents and 4 principals, worked well into the middle of the night discussing the best ways to move forward on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, settled a new teacher contract, and negotiated 2 budgets amidst enormous economic, public health, and educational uncertainties. Through it all, we have endeavored to model collegiality and professionalism, and overwhelmingly, we have succeeded in that endeavor. I am proud to call myself a colleague of each and every one of you. It takes courage of one's convictions to stand up and be willing to serve on the Board of Education. As Theodore Roosevelt famously said and is often quoted, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and to at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." With the election now behind us, we have 4 lame ducks at the table tonight, with just a few days remaining on their terms. And I'd like to take a brief moment just to recognize them. So thank you to Chris, Colleen, John, and Heather for your service to our schools. You have answered the call with diligence, integrity, and good humor. And while I will miss your company at this board table, I'm sure we can find a couple of committees to get you on. And Mike always likes company in the audience. So, I don't have crystal apples, unfortunately.
They're not the apples.
Heather?
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Wait,
Thank you.
We doubled the pay from last year.
Make this look.
This is one free ride on the helicopter, right? An extra.
Sorry, this is way better than Apple, Mike.
It's better than that.
Thanks.
That's nice. Thank you.
Other board members?
I'll briefly, but when I first joined the Board of Education, one of the first things I did was I went to the Veterans Day event at RES, and Jim Hines was there. And Jim Hines said, Board of Education, he goes, of all the municipal jobs, that's the worst one, everybody hates you. And he had no idea how right he was. But this has been such an honor and a joy most times, and I feel like the work that we did, I'm really proud of, and we've made some changes here that were necessary, and when we all work together and find consensus on those things, I think that those were the highlights, and I not only have appreciated all of you as colleagues, but also as friends. So thank you so much, and thank you to the people of Reading.
Chris?
Well, as you sort of suggested, when I agreed to fill in the vacancy, it didn't occur to me that there would be two superintendent searches, a pandemic, all that. So, but I don't regret a minute. I should also mention that I have lost elections before, and each time a friend of mine has sent me that Roosevelt, and I really hate it. But no, I appreciate that, and it actually has been, because as most of you know, I spent quite a bit of time on the Region 9 board, and these last 2 years, the collegiality and the kind of the way that people conduct themselves has been very, very gratifying to me. So I appreciate that.
Well, I wrote it down, which I never read a statement here, but so I'm going to echo a lot of what you guys have already just said, but I also didn't want to fumble around my words here. Yesterday, we all took part in municipal elections, and I wish the successful candidates well, particularly Sharad, Laura, John, and Julie, who will sit right here a month from now and continue the work that I've been honored to do. We all really truly voted for Reading when we moved here and decided to raise our families here. Most of us chose this town specifically for the schools, and all of us at this meeting deeply care about improving life for our community, especially our children. I'm proud of the work we've done, the long nights we spent figuring out how we could possibly defer the eternal next year so that we can hold on to a third grade teacher or Project Adventure, which I'm now hearing all about in the afternoons when people have lobbied me to keep it. My girls are raving about it. I'm proud of the new hires we made. 2 stellar superintendents, 2 caring and thoughtful principals, 1 very hardworking assistant principal, and many others, both at central office and those working directly with students each day. I'm proud of the contracts we negotiated that simultaneously keep compensation fair for our staff and taxes fair for our neighbors and friends. But there's clearly unfinished business that both time and coping with dual pandemics has kept us from accomplishing. And I urge our successors to look closely at adjusting start times to align with human biology, moving closer to a true tri-board structure, because I just don't think our administrators need to be spending 20 days each month in these meetings when they could be spending 20 days each month in the classroom. And moving 5th grade back to the elementary school where our colleagues in Easton and most other towns agree it belongs. But what I cherish most about my time on this board is the friendships I've developed in this role. And I'm glad there's no term limits on it.
John, another comment?
Should I say something? I of course don't have anything prepared because because I would never have anything prepared, and I will probably clumper over my words, but I mostly want to thank my daughter because the people who are in my life, she has had to sacrifice the most in sharing me, Mom, as I did my work on the Board of Ed. I also am very grateful for this board. I really think if I didn't feel the support that I do feel amongst this group, I probably would have quit. There were some very low moments throughout these past 4 years when you just feel like, what is going on here? Enough is enough. Like, is this really worth it? And through the support of this group, I really am grateful for it that I stuck with it. I'm grateful for our staff, that the staff that stuck with us through this period of time, and then the staff that was courageous enough to join us. I thank our students for, they're the real reason why any of us are here and have this amazing ability to recharge batteries, right? When you are feeling low about the political nature of passing a budget or getting elected, and then you come into the school and you see the kids at work in their element, it would kind of refresh and renew and remind me of why I was doing this work. So I thank them. I'm grateful. I'm relieved that we have families who are thriving here, and they tell us. But for the families and the students who aren't thriving and are struggling still, even though the members of this board, some of us might be retiring, there is a wonderful support group of really dedicated staff and volunteers that care. And I think we just have to remain committed to working together and continuing to communicate with each other, and so that we can continue to move forward, because Reading really is a gem. When I started this work, I was like the optimistic, like, oh, Reading is so great, we're going to be able to accomplish so much. And then once I really got into the understanding of what was possible, I had to come back to earth a little bit, but I still remain committed to my ideal that Reading is a gem, and we need to act like it, we need to take care of it, and that progress will always win. So sometimes there are obstacles in the way, but in the end, we will get there. So I don't know, that's kind of, thank you for the honor of serving on the board.
Other comment? Dr. Stark? Okay, that brings us on to administration reports. Dr. McGinn.
Thank you very much. Well, I too would like to take a moment to thank those board members who are passing on, and thank you very much for your work. We're deeply grateful for your service, and I think on behalf of the faculty, the students, and the leaders, we thank you. You said, Heather, you said that this was, that potentially this could be the worst job. I don't know whether it's the worst job. I think it's one of the most important jobs that a community can have, and a community member can have. We have a saying in research and in education that all research stands on the shoulders of giants, which essentially means the work we're doing today has roots to the past. And I think that future board members coming into this role will build on the work that you have done, just like research builds on the shoulders of giants. So I think that your work will continue on. A good board is not a political group. We should not know, and I still do not know, who was a Democrat or a Republican, and I hope that the board members coming into this community, into this group, truly focuses on students, the classroom, and what students need. I think that's really important, it goes without saying. So I just want to congratulate you for your service. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hopefully you serving on committees, because we do have some committees and some focus groups that we'd like to run to reach out to you.
I feel like he was looking right at it.
So I'd like to ask the administrators to, I know you submitted reports just to hit the high points, and board members, you have those in your packet already, but perhaps we can start with Sharon.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and I too thank you for your support of Reading Elementary. It's my pleasure to be here. I can't believe it's November already. It just seems as if it has flown by. But fall does continue to be a very busy time at RES. We had our Halloween parade, which was great fun. I was in my cat in the hat costume. Having been a former reading consultant, have to go along with clothes. The weather cooperated, and each of our grade levels filed out of our front doors and around the bus loop to show off their costumes. The parade is at RES a very special tradition, and it was nice to have it back. It had been 2 years since we had held a parade. 1 year evidently due to weather, and then last year, of course, due to the pandemic. We are now looking forward to our Veterans Day celebration, which someone mentioned, having been at RES for that before, and I'm looking forward to it. We will include virtual classroom visits from veterans, as well as each grade level participating in writing either cards or letters to veterans. Lots of decoration going on, bulletin boards, windows. We'll all be showing our spirit, our support with red, white, and blue on that day. Our PTA is coordinating a collection called Save a Suit. If anyone wants to donate, they will have some bins out by the front of our building, and that's a way of donating suits to veterans. And last but certainly not least, Julia Pemberton will provide a pre-recorded Veterans Day morning announcement for all of our guests. So we're looking forward to that coming up soon. And as you can see in our RES board report, this month we are featuring a spotlight on fine and practical arts classes. These include library media, general music, art, PE, Spanish, and instrumental music for grade 3 and 4 strings. And it is most celebratory that we are back in our specialized locations for those classes. You may recall that last year we had all those folks with all their materials on carts going to classrooms. Not the best of situations. So they are thrilled to have their own locations again. And of course, this is an important program for all of our students. Yesterday, we did conduct our professional development, and that was a very productive day. Lots of really good conversation around topics of our new math resource, looking at any proposed or needed changes to our report card in order to align. We also spent a good deal of time examining how our students are adjusting back to school at this point and how they are performing in relation to academics, engagement, stamina, and behaviors in general. We shared lots of techniques and strategies, and I think although we still have work to do in that area in order to continue, we really felt that the conversation was needed and very beneficial. As far as numbers are concerned, I'd like to take a look at how we're doing. We're pretty steady. At this point, I believe we added 1 kindergarten child since these numbers in your report were printed. So we are at 495 right now as a total number. Any questions?
Any questions on Marty?
Okay, thank you so much.
Good evening. Thank you all too for your support, John Reed. I'm so happy to be here. As I said last time, our Project Adventure trips are starting up, so it's a little chilly as it was this morning. But they are going out tomorrow and Monday, so that's half of our Project Adventure for the year for those 8th graders on those field trips. Today we also announced for 22 7th and 8th graders who are joining our Wingman program, so the students were informed that they were selected and letters are going home to parents, so we're very excited to see that program come back to John Reed as well. Our John Reed Outreach Committee has distributed over 175 Ben's bells. So Remember those are the ceramic flowers that you might see, so they've been distributed throughout, and then students pass them from one to another when they recognize moments of kindness and good-naturedness in the school. So really excited to see so many being distributed. We also celebrated Unity Day on October 20th, which focused on small steps our school can take to spread kindness, acceptance, and inclusion, and students made little outlines and footprints. You can see the image in the update to spread that. We also have a new school nurse, so we sadly said goodbye to Corey Disler, our beloved school nurse who's been here for many years and whose children went through the schools as well. So Corey's moved on to her next chapter, and we're very, very fortunate to have Colleen McLeod join us, who might be familiar face and name. She spent a number of years at Reading, so it's nice to have that familiarity at John Reed. We also, on October 14th, conducted the first ever evacuation drill at John Reed. I think our only regret on that beautiful day was that we didn't time it with our Halloween parade. But it was really successful. We made it to Mark Twain, all of us, there and back in 43 minutes. And we conducted it along with Sean McGinney and Mark O'Donnell, and it coordinated really well. And it was a beautiful day for a nice mile round trip walk. So that was really successful. Last week we celebrated our Spirit Week, and we were really fortunate to have, we're always very fortunate to have Judy Collantine, who is one of our PE Health and Wellness teachers. She is also the advisor of the Spirit Club. So she, along with the student members of the Spirit Club, organized our parade. So we had each of the 4 grades parading around the front median. We had our FPA teachers as the judges for the most creative costumes as well as other categories, which was a ton of fun, and we had different themes throughout the week for our Spirit Week. Yesterday, we had a full staff PD. I want to especially thank Bianca Paolello, who's one of our new school counselors this year. She led a staff training on trauma-sensitive and trauma-informed teaching practices in the classroom, which she did an amazing job, and teachers were really excited to have some strategies for their toolbox. So she and Joyce Guterre, our other school counselor, will continue to push out strategies at various meetings throughout the year. We're really excited for that continuum. I also want to thank Sarah Scrifani, who did a highlight with us. She spent about an hour with us yesterday as the Director of Technology. And I also want to thank Matt Goodwin, one of our social studies teachers, who was brave and workshopped a lesson with her, and we were, again, able to discuss great strategies, not only instructional strategies, but technology strategies in the classroom. We also conducted our own needs assessment as a full staff, and I think it was really nice. We know that student voice is so important in the classroom, and yesterday I was really able to witness just how important the teacher voice is in developing our plan for the future. So I think we were really aligned in our goals and our vision for John Reed, and it was really exciting work for all of us here. We are also starting a new Student of the Month initiative. So teachers nominated for this month of November, we have 16 students across all grades who were nominated, and those students were nominated because in some way they exemplify either taking care of themselves, taking care of others, or taking care of their community. So on Friday, they'll all get certificates, and those will be announced on Friday. So really great things happening at John Reed. Any questions?
How's the roof?
It's coming along. I won't say that I don't do a water walk on when it rains the night before to recognize how many buckets we need, but we're working on it. We've slowed it down. How about that? Yeah.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Quick question, Megan. The evacuation drill, is that based on a requirement, a best practice? How did that come about?
It is, I think every 3 years, an evacuation drill should be conducted, whether that's best practice or a requirement. I know it was planned pre-COVID and it never occurred. So meeting with Sean, Director of Emergency Management, and Mark O'Donnell, we felt like this was the right time to do it, and confirmed that our plans are appropriate and recognize the different locations we might use and implement should such an emergency occur. So it was well worth doing.
I think it's a good practice, and it should be detailed in our all hazard plans. I don't know whether that's something that you've seen for board members.
I don't think we've
It
ever
is.
reviewed it.
It's in our all hazards, so there were, based on our drill, we were able to make some updates in terms of how we locate students in a true emergency. So I'm glad we did it. We have a good plan in place.
I'm wondering if maybe that isn't shared at the board level because our meetings are held in public and some of that information is not information that you would want the general
The
public.
school security stuff is all,
There's elements of it that we,
Yeah.
that we private. Yeah. But it's certainly something that a director of facilities would, along with the roof
Two
and the
things,
well.
right?
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you.
Jennifer, comment?
very simple.
I just wanted to talk about three broad areas today. The first is, as Megan pointed out, we had professional development yesterday, so many of our special ed teachers were able to join, their building colleagues on learning about all the exciting things that are happening in the building levels. But at the same time, we also did, this is our recertification time. We have to make sure that we're compliant with restraints and seclusion. So we wanted to give our staff a refresher on how to work with students that may have some challenges in the classroom. So we spent a half a day doing some we call PMT training. We also are committed to expanding the repertoire of our special ed teachers, especially around the area of structured literacy. So some of them are be engaging in a year-long structured literacy program or initiative. So again, it's self-paced, but we're going through what we call Work Gillingham. We're very fortunate that we have a tri-district consultant, but we wanted to make sure that our teachers had a good understanding of OT training. This is also the time where we open our preschool lottery. So the preschool applications will be going up. And we've already had some inquiries from families of young children looking to enroll their child for the next school year. So we have our preschool application going up soon. If you look at my numbers, they're pretty consistent from last year. So, we continue to work collaboratively with parents to make sure that their child is supported through process. That's where we are. Thank you.
Mr. Scott Petrozelli, I'm eager to hear from you to provide a budget update.
So I don't know exactly how to start, but attached is a budget object summary report. So I still don't have access to the reporting part of our finance system, so I don't know if this is exactly what we've seen in the past, but this is what we have for tonight. Are there any specific questions or?
I guess the general questions you'll get familiar to hearing are there any areas where we have concern about running over or that we should be monitoring going forward as we're sort of heading towards the mid part of the fiscal year? It looked like some of the lines looked in trouble based on this report, but I'm not sure if that is subject to just sort of differences in approach.
I have to give a full review, so I'd be remiss if I was to make any comments right now. But according to the staff, we're okay. And again, for next month, I assure you we'll have a much more granular report and a status. But on a different note, the good news is I think we're about to close finally the year already, and we have around 200 without any unexpected invoices coming in. We have about $268,000, I believe.
So that's for fiscal year end June 30th, 2021.
Can you just give me the exact number?
And that's prior to any allocations subject to the board's authority.
Yes, it's 268, 341, 68, and that's us closing all the open POs and following up with any vendors if we have any outstanding invoices. So like I said, without, any unexpected invoices, this would be the number. And then if I could just segue into, I know that due to the timing of this board's meeting, the date of it, we don't get the benefit information, so we're almost reporting last month. But for this month, I did spend a little time with Vicki a couple hours ago, and we were in a deficit position of 186, 172.20 as of the end of September. And that is with the 4 months that were deposited from this year's budget of 754, 173.22. And we did get the claims for October, which were $395, $394, $43. So I would recommend or putting the funds from last year's budget against the.
We've already directed that.
Oh,
We have a meeting at the end of June every year to direct the allocation of unspent funds before closing the fiscal year. And I was just going to look up the minutes, but I believe we allocated an amount up to $500,000 to move into the health insurance claims fund. And so if we're under $300,000, that will be subject to that directive that's already been given.
Or it was top it up.
Top it up to 500.
500.
Either way,
If we have
286
enough
is
to
going
do
to.
that, yeah.
yeah, and that actually with that amount, we're still going to be in a deficit position, which I'll report on again with a little more granularity. So we might, in fact,
You said the October number was 394.
the October claims was 395 and 394.
Looking at this report, they're jumping all over the place. From July 369, August 177, September 242, and October 394, which is a high water mark for all time. it looks like.
I was going to ask if August and September are accurate in their spread and if they're up to date, because last year we had a couple.
So those were exactly my questions.
Yeah.
And again, Vicki and I are meeting Friday to go through this with a little more rigor, but the reporting is accurate, and, because she seemed to think it was a little bit high. Also the way, because we have a high deductible, people will keep reaching their deductibles, so we wouldn't expect this amount of claims. So again, I do have to dig into it a little bit more and get that granularity that really.
Yeah, it's a good
Very
point.
sure
Good
you
point
got
about
it.
the deductibles.
So she was a little surprised, especially in the first 4 months of the start of a new year, right? So,
And just for absolute clarity, I'm looking back at our meeting minutes from June 21st, where the board authorized the Director of Finance and Operations to use unspent funds to fund the health insurance reserve up to a total amount of $600,000 and return any additional money to the town beyond that. So it sounds like we're well within that $600,000 we needed. So all of that would go into that claims fund. But you're saying that would still run a deficit based on this 394 number?
yes.
I think we're for December, we're going to want to dig a little deeper into what's going on there, have a better understanding of it, because if we're in a situation where we're in the red heading into, we're going to have to talk about what adjustments need to be made from a budget perspective and what notice needs to be given to the town about the situation. It's going to need going in that direction.
Agree 100%. That's why we have the whole afternoon slotted for Friday to go over that.
394 is a big red flag.
So don't miss this number when you're going to.
So what?
And I guess
I don't
just
think
got a copy of.
Yes. good.
Yeah.
So,
And that's that number you just talked about, or who's going to go in there, which will put us in a slightly worse position than what we're talking about, I think. So,
On the health claims report, we'll want to see that deposit of the 267 reflected and the current status of what the claims fund is. Once we get into December, which hopefully we'll have November numbers by then, but obviously it's always a little bit tricky in the first week of the month.
there's also another number.
So I don't know the proper etiquette, but, we'll have that information shortly. If you want it shared before the next meeting, it's.
Yeah, I think what will be
I'm sure
helpful
that-
is after you have that meeting with Vicki, if you could provide an updated claims report to the board that reflects the current numbers with that, that'll be helpful, even as a sort of in-between board meetings report, so we have that to kind of work with and have understanding.
I would love to do that in more than.
There's also this at a glance at the bottom here.
Yeah, this number is wrong.
Yeah.
What it's doing is it's taking all 12 months. Actually, it's more like it's 263, 324 actually. So
Right.
I just didn't want to, until I fully understand this whole thing, I didn't want to repass it out.
And I think I'll say what I say to every administrator when they start. This is a report that was designed by somebody else. If there is a better way for you to understand, interpret, or communicate that information, we're all for it. This is just a model that was built on and it's continued to be built upon. So as you dig in, if you find a better way to communicate it, that's totally fine.
No, thank you. And that's what we're going line by line through it Friday, just so I can understand and make sure the signs are the way the sign should be done to reflect the deficit and the surplus also. So thank you for your patience.
I think the same thing goes for the budget object summary. I know this is printed right, probably out of eFinance Plus.
Yep.
A reference point could be what we spent in October this year versus what we spent in October last year. That's often a useful benchmark, just to kind of, to compare month to month.
Identify outliers.
Right. And so we can talk about that, Scott, like just how you make this report your own.
Exactly, Jason. I know one of the capabilities of our system is to download this into Excel, which I'm looking to do. And like I said,
Right.
I'm always used for the past 25 years comparing to previous year, previous quarter. So, that should absolutely be reflected in here, as well as, our encumbrances also. So,
Yeah,
and if we want to see both schools or just one line instead of seeing two lines for each one to delineate each school if that's necessary or not, so.
This is helpful as a data point, and I know it's unfair to expect you to have comprehensive knowledge after 3 days or 5 days, how long it feels like it's been, but we'll work together over the next few weeks and get it to the point where we can get information that current and future board members will appreciate going into it. This is helpful because we haven't seen a budget object summary in a couple of months because of the transition, so at least we can exhale a little bit, knowing a little bit more about what's current. It's helpful.
Like I've been concentrating on the efforts of closing our books, which I know was a little bit late, so.
Other questions, Scott? Okay. Anything on the transfers to call out? I didn't think so.
I do. I have 2 small transfers. I think they're on the last page. Again, I think I was at one of the schools for a good portion of the day, so the actual explanations might be sitting in my email, which I haven't checked yet, but they are small, $30 going from one account to the other, and $445.25. So again, I'm sure, because I asked for the explanation of why we're exactly moving it. So I think I have an idea in my head talking about one of them, but not being 100% sure. I don't want to comment on it. So
They're not material at this point either.
exactly.
I think if you figured out what the explanation was and circulated the memo to the board, that would be fine.
Done.
2 cents.
Yeah. Again, I didn't quite know the etiquette, but I'll be more than happy to send an email out to everybody as soon as I get the explanation from the 2 months.
Thank you, Scott. Questions? Chris?
Other than that, how's it going?
I'm actually excited. I truly believe with the team we have that, we have a real unique opportunity here for the kids of the districts. And I'm actually really excited about it. I like the organized chaos. I think it's a great way to, a great environment to.
That's the politest way to
Yes,
describe it.
that's
It's a
spot
step
on.
up from the disorganized chaos.
Yeah. You're gonna love it.
She says 10 days before her termination. Good question and comments? Thank you, Scott, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you all.
We're very happy you're here. Thank you.
Looking forward to it.
Dr. Mason,
So I would like to begin just by giving my own thanks to the board members who will be there, to John, and to Colleen, and to Chris, and to Heather. So as I was driving to the board meeting this evening, I was thinking about my colleagues and sitting around the table with all of you, and I realized, oh, I might be the only one who remembers X number of years back when we had a very different composition. And certainly over those years, we have spent a lot of hours together. And I'm sure at times it truly felt thankless. And I'm sure there were times where it really felt like we were swimming upstream. But I will say that for this board, I really felt that you listened to one another and you dig into challenging work, and you do so with purpose and with commitment. And as one of the leaders who's been around here for a while, I appreciate that work so much because I care about the children in this town and for these 3 districts. And this is such an important part of our work as leaders, to have a board of education that works together to support our schools and do what's best for our children. So thank you. Thank you for your time and for your we will miss you, and I do hope that you continue serving on the many, many, many committees.
We're shrinking, I heard we're only going like 3 of them.
So my report is brief in the category of math communication. We created we meaning our elementary math specialists at Easton and Reading, created a presentation for parents to explain our new math program and held a live Q&A session that was over Zoom. We recorded it for parents who were not able to participate in the moment. And we're doing the same thing for the middle school math. So presentation, if it was not sent out late this afternoon, will be sent out tomorrow morning. And we've scheduled a parent Q&A session for next week. The health curriculum will be under review, a very focused review for all 3 districts. There are some specific questions that have been raised by at least one board member of each of the 3 boards during our tri-district wellness committee meeting. And that will prompt, as I said, a focused review. So Region 9 has already determined that focus in Easton and Reading. We'll have a meeting in December, and we can decide what guiding questions that will prompt a presentation and a possible revision of the health curriculum. Other than that, similar to the curriculum website that we debuted last month, I'm looking forward to publishing a climate webpage. And I'm saying webpage as opposed to full website because it will be a link off of our existing site. And that we really hope to be a place where people can find a lot of information about climate. Information about our Safe School Climate Plan, which will now be revised since the latest climate policy has been adopted by all 3 boards, and a place where people can find reporting forms, as well as the structures that we have in place in our schools that inform how we deal with conflict, how we solve problems in a way that is respectful and inclusive. So we hope that it's a place where people find resources as well as policies. And that should be published in, I would say, in the next 2 weeks. So I'm excited about that. John?
Slightly off, well, not off topic, but one of the things that I'm getting feedback from parents on is for kids who are quarantined. Are we getting any guidance from the state or from other avenues as to providing meaningful lessons and things for kids who are at home for 7, 8, 9, 10 days in order to, because of obviously quarantine mandates, to keep their education moving forward?
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask Dr. McKinney to respond to the first part of it. The second part of it, there are some changes ahead. There's a new program that we have yet to discuss in depth in the central office, and we have a transition, as you heard about. Corey Disler, our wonderful nurse coordinator, is retiring, and so someone else is taking over that role. But the state is beginning to roll out a new program that's called Screen, Test and Stay, Test and Stay, something that would allow students that have not yet been vaccinated to be able to attend school, even if they're identified as a close contact, provided that the parents can show proof of testing. So that is something that we're going to explore, which would greatly reduce any quarantines, period. But before we get to that point, there are some things that have been discussed with our administrators to make sure that students who are at home in quarantine have contact from someone in school. And Dr. McKinney sent a communication to all of our principals about that recently.
So we wanted to make sure that, we heard some feedback from parents who had quarantined students, that sometimes students couldn't access materials, sometimes there wasn't point of contact, there was confusion over how to get started on the work. We do rely on Google Classroom for teachers to share assignments and post assignments, and there was some concerns expressed that the Google Classroom naming conventions were accurate, were helpful. So we developed kind of a 2 or 3 page summary which allows parents, well, it's a handout that's on our website that allows parents to know exactly where to go in order to receive work from their classroom teacher. And then we also asked a administrators, principals, to identify a point of contact so that when a student is placed into quarantine by a nurse, they actually receive a phone call from the school and explains to them, this is how you access the work that you're missing. And then we also encourage teachers of students in quarantine to reach out to their students as well. So we at least wanted to make sure that asynchronous learning was streamlined and that students who are at home were able to access the resources. And then as Dr. Pearson-Hugo mentioned, the state is looking to roll out ways in which we can keep students in school through screen and test and stay. One piece of news I was going to bring up, which I communicated to Easton and Reading, was the vaccination clinic for age 5 through 11 students. I work with Griffin Hospital to provide a clinic that will be at Samuel Staples Elementary School and Reading Elementary School on November 16th and 18th, where parents can bring their child if they're interested in. And so far, just to give you an updated number, we have, let me see if I can find that survey. I have the spreadsheet. Hold on a second.
Well, okay, thanks very much for doing the work to put that together.
Oh, you're welcome. Just lost the tab.
During parent-teacher conference week, so the hope is that it really will not be as disruptive, and parents might have already been arranging to take some time off during that.
Yeah, thank you. And right now it's scheduled to be drop-in and not scheduled.
I actually think we're looking to create a schedule.
Okay.
Yes, so we wanted to, so we surveyed parents. We had 592 responses from the first day that we sent out the survey. We can send that link out again to remind students, parents to take that survey. Out of the 592 responses, 65% of families who responded signaled that they intend to vaccinate their age 5 through 11 age child. So that number may go up a little bit. We sent out another reminder.
That's across both towns?
That's across both towns. The vaccine will be distributed during parent-teacher conference. Now that we have some preliminary information, we can send out a follow-up to parents. We are saying that if you're a Reading Elementary child, you can turn up at Reading Elementary School to get your vaccine. We're not going to block a student from Samuel Staples to come over to the Reading School if the schedule doesn't permit that. And then the follow-up vaccination is approximately 3 weeks later. We've got those 2 dates scheduled in December, but they are not aligned to obviously parent-teacher conferences, so we're going to have to work that out.
So would they be slotted into the evening or would it still be determined?
It's still to be determined, but it would, based on the number of responses, 65% of 6,600 students, we could probably fit those time slots in between the hours of 4 p.m. and 7 p.m.
And the expectation is a parent will be present.
A parent has to be present, and based on the data, we'll probably schedule a time slot. So we'll say, please show up at this time, this time, this time, just to streamline it. And registration will take place on when you show up for your appointment.
Can I say that 65% was 65% of respondents? And I'm just having flashbacks to the DEI survey and where people were trying to sort of game the system by taking that survey more than once. Could people respond to this more than once?
Well, it's possible because we didn't require an email address
Okay.
when you submitted the survey, but we did voluntarily ask for a person to provide their email when they provided a response, and I would say most respondents did.
Okay.
But I would say that we would send out a reminder,
Mhm.
give another chance for a family to indicate their interest, collect the email address, and then send a follow-up. Now that we have email addresses, we can send a follow-up message just to people who provided their email address, for example. So there are ways in which we can register students.
I would assume that some respondents will buy the vaccine before November 16th and
Yeah.
18th
I
fall.
think so.
back to another part of your report on the math program, is there a 30-second version for anyone who may be watching as to how has that evolved? I mean, what's it changing from, and to what extent is it, how significant a change is it?
Let's see.
I'm trying
The
to-
most important thing, yes, the most important thing that has not changed is our philosophical approach to the way that children learn mathematics. So our new program is not a departure for what we believe about how students learn. So they begin with the concrete, and they build to the pictorial, and eventually the abstract. And that approach was present in Math in Focus, our former program, and it's also present in our current program, which is Envision. Both are well aligned to the national beliefs about teaching mathematics. What's different about this program is that it is more closely aligned to the Connecticut Common Core math standards. So our former program sometimes went beyond a given standard, sometimes we fell slightly short of the standard, and that required a lot of very tedious work on the part of the math leaders to determine, for instance, on a unit test, whether the student had mastered the standards that were appropriate for that grade, even if they perhaps didn't get all of the items correct, because the test was not well correlated, was not well aligned with the standards for the grade level. Our new program is not only very tightly aligned to the standards, but it also offers us the electronic ability for, if we choose to have students take the assessments on the computer, on a Chromebook, we can do that item analysis, and the benefit there is that then in the moment can inform instruction. So a teacher can see in this group of students has mastered this particular standard within this topic, and so their homework might be different. Or this other group is going to need some small group instruction because they're still struggling with this other standard. So that is a great benefit to the program. I have heard some concerns about the use of videos, students watching screens on a daily basis, so I'll just share this for all of you and for anyone who might be watching at home. There is what I will call a brief stimulation at the beginning of each lesson that is that's a video. It's about 2 to 3 minutes long. So I think that when students come home and they share with an adult at home, we watch a video every day in math class. The vision that comes to mind is my child is sitting for 30, 40 minutes watching TV, when really the idea here is that it's just a focus. You know, it's some type of a visual image or a picture. The one I was watching in a kindergarten class one day had to do with a parent setting a table and putting plates out and encouraging the student to count the number of plates that were being placed around the table. So again, very brief. It's really there to get the kids focused, and then the teachers teach into the concept. So that's something that people might be hearing, so I can say sort of what it is not. Things are going well. The first year of the implementation of any new program is a little bit clunky in that the teachers have to live it soup to nuts all the way through before they can make those experience decisions of these two lessons can probably be combined. This is one I'm going to leave out altogether. This is one I'm going to teach differently, etc. And you, even though they preview them, you sort of have to live through it first before they can do that. And you know, we've been through this. Will be now the third math program that I've experienced. We moved to this program really just because the publisher for Math in Focus was no longer printing the materials, and our digital licenses had expired. So even if we'd stayed with Math in Focus, we would have needed to move on to the new edition. So that's what prompted the change. And I would say I feel good that we made the right decision. You know, we're living through a few growing pains right now, but I hear that a real positive is that the students are engaged in more problem solving on a very regular basis than they were in the former program, and on the balance side of things, also more math fact practice. So I'm hearing this sort of for the traditional, the kids need to practice their math facts, they're getting math fact practice, and they're doing some problems. I probably went over.
No, very helpful to sort of understand that. I'm assuming with all of this that there are still such things as right and wrong answers.
There absolutely are. In fact, what I'm hearing about the unit assessments, I mentioned they can take them on the Chromebook. They are multiple choice. And so there's probably less problem solving that people are seeing in those unit assessments. And I will just say that that is just one part of the program. There's quite a bit of work that happens on paper and through discussion and thinking and discussing that maybe is not evident by looking at the unit tests.
Thank you.
What's the feedback been from teachers so far?
Generally positive, a little bit of frustration with some of the tech elements in the startup. The onboarding process, despite the fact that we, you might remember we mapped out this PD starting last spring, uploading of rosters, that kind of thing. So grateful to the support of Sarah Scrifani. So even though she's not the person actually doing the roster upload, she can get into the back end and figure out, oh, the method you were using was never going to work because it's just not aligned with the way that the program is designed on the back end. And that's been enormously helpful. So I would say, in terms of a whole program, the response from teachers has been positive. There are little things that are frustrating that I wish we could have worked out in advance, but here we are.
Totally different topic. It calls back a little bit to our conversation a month ago about test scores and things. I noticed from my own experience that NWA scores from the fall came back to families in the past couple of days. That being another data point as far as learning loss and things from the district perspective. Any high-level takeaways from those assessments at this point, or is it too soon to tell?
I would say it's too soon to tell. That's a conversation that I would need to have with Megan and with Darlene first. We typically use the NWEA information on a very individual basis. It would be unusual for us to say that that's sort of a gauge of the entire school, because one of the benefits of the NWA map analysis is that we can look at a student's sort of potential to make progress and then the actual progress that they're making, and then think about their instruction. Are we giving the student the right challenges? Are we providing the right reinforcement? So while we do get information about the performance of the entire grade, the better use is really to look at how we use that to support individual students.
Thank you.
It does bring to mind, I know we're focused on the social emotional well-being of our students, and that is a huge focus of mine, and it would be if I were on the board or if I wasn't on the board, but also of our staff, right? They just went through a really incredibly challenging few years, right? It was really a few years. And we're still expecting the launch of new programs, and we're still expecting high achievement. We're still, just to make sure that we also have supports in place for like teacher burnout. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So on that note, Colleen, I'm glad you brought that up. So yesterday, our original plan for professional development for our elementary teachers was for them to spend half the day digging into one part of the new math program called Success Maker, and it's a part of the program that's much more individualized to provide student either support or enrichment, and it's a tech-based program. And the math specialists in both districts came to me and they said, the teachers can do this, but they're really, kind of up to their eyeballs just being immersed in the new program. Can we see if we can postpone it for a little while? And so I worked with the publishing company, and we decided to defer that professional development so that they could spend the 3 hours yesterday working with teams to really talk about how they're making decisions to use the program on a daily basis, how they're using the core part of the resource, as opposed to continuing to push them to learn one new thing when they were saying, please just let us breathe for a moment and become better at the day-to-day.
Okay.
So we are trying to be responsive to those needs, and I really I really appreciate the leadership of our content specialist in that work as well, who I know feel very comfortable coming to me and saying, you know, we need more or we need different.
One more. Back to John's off-topic question about quarantine. Could you clarify something? I heard you saying something about the future quarantine vaccinated students versus unvaccinated and testing. Can you go over that, because I didn't quite get it? Is that something that's coming, obviously,
It's something that
after
the state is starting to talk about it. So we have not rolled that out yet as a district, but the discussion at the state level through their collaboration with the Department of Public Health is that unvaccinated students could potentially stay in school even after they've been identified as a close contact and they were asymptomatic if the parents were willing to, on a daily basis, to provide written confirmation that they had been tested and they were, and the student remains COVID-free. So it's quite a bit of work for the parent, but if there is a high level of motivation to keep the student in school and the student is either not appropriate for vaccination or the parents choose not to have them vaccinated, that could be an option.
So that's the unvaccinated half testing every day, and the vaccinated half is?
Students who are vaccinated, if they are asymptomatic, do not have to quarantine.
Okay.
Right? And if
That's
they
the
are
way it is.
symptomatic, of course, they're ill, so we would want them to be in school.
12 and over, that's already the way that it is now.
Yes.
I was just remembering that we had an issue a few years ago. There was a measles outbreak. Remember this? And it was reported that Reading had an extraordinarily high number of parents who didn't vaccinate their kids for
Yeah.
measles. And those
It was
kids,
off by a factor of 10 or something.
Right.
yeah, those kids had to stay home from school for like a month. Do you remember that? They were not allowed in school.
I don't remember
Remember
I remember
the
the
report,
error
right.
in the news report.
Well, it wasn't an error. There were a lot of,
There was also.
Well, there wasn't,
yeah.
there was an error in the.
Yeah, there were some that were
There was
unvaccinated,
both.
but
There
it's
was
not
both.
nearly that.
Yeah, there was both. It wasn't as high, because it was like half the kids in Reading. It wasn't that bad. But there were quite a few.
Remember the staying home?
And I remember that they were not in school during that measles outbreak.
I don't remember that among Reading students. I remember there being measles outbreaks in Connecticut. but-
I remember a kid, I mean, maybe it was her parents' choice, but who wasn't in school for quite some time. So maybe it's something to look into. I don't know. I mean, it just because historically these things have happened. I remember being lined up in my sophomore year of college, and we all had to get measles shots for measles outbreak in New England colleges.
When the state does finalize that, I assume that'll make it all the way through and out via email?
It will, and it's really something that we need to discuss with our new nurse coordinator and really talk about the logistics of rolling that out, because it would require quite a bit of work on the part of both parents and then also the staff at each school site would be managing that information on a daily basis.
Needing information from every student on their status.
Yes, and that's information that most parents are providing anyway, but certainly whenever we have a group of students who have been identified as a close contact with a positive case, each one of those parents is contacted, and the first question is whether they've been vaccinated or not, because that determines the need to quarantine. So that's information that we are gathering. You know, if our numbers stay low, it might not be too much of a burden. But if we think back to where we were last year, that would be quite a comprehensive task on a daily basis, both for the parents and for the staff.
I think
Something
we
that
have
we're still
four
discussing.
kids quarantined here on 9/1 right now. At some point last winter, it was 250 or something.
There's just two other parts to that. First of all, the Commissioner of Education is working with the Commissioner of DPH to kind of work out this plan, and if it does move forward, it will have to go through the governor's office and then come back to the superintendents in order to implement some type of strategy. The other thing they're looking at is not so much when someone is a close contact and you're not vaccinated, you initially require a test, but after the test, if it's negative, then you have to attest each day that your child is asymptomatic. And that might be a way to move around the daily negative test, rather than the parent has to actually write, my child is no symptoms today, no symptoms today, and then
A lot better.
Yeah.
so that's a possible.
And in theory, that's what our parents are doing anyway, right? So it is our expectation that every parent is performing a daily health screening.
And so now that would be actually
This
their
would
testing.
need to be memorialized.
So we'd have to work that, what that system would be. And then we're not, school nurses don't have to ask parents if their child is vaccinated. They can go into a database called CT-WITS and actually see whether a child is vaccinated as well. So that's why.
The good news is by the time logistics are worked out, a large number of kids will be vaccinated anyway. So
Okay.
any other questions on Stephanie's report or other rambling conversations? Thank you. That brings us to any other issue?
Just one more point, and that is, I sent a message to you on November 1st, but in that message I talked about the RES principal interviews and how we're conducting that in 4 phases. We're very grateful to Sharon, who's been with us. She's not with us for much longer. Well, she's with us through January, February. But we mentioned that Dr. Pearson, Hugo, and I will screen 16 plus candidates that we have approximately now who applied for the position. That there is a first round interview that we're looking to schedule on November 19th here in this room. I don't think I've talked to Megan about that, but Megan, we would like to use this room on November 19th. I'll reach out to you. But we do need at least 2 board members on November 19th. The second round interview will involve a committee, obviously, and 4 candidates on November 30th. Book fair?
Yeah.
Book fair held in here?
Yeah, this room.
Okay. We'll have to work around that. And then
Thank you, John. I was just looking.
we're looking at December 7th as a board meeting where we could potentially appoint, or maybe interview and appoint the successful candidates. So it's a tight time frame. We can adjust it if there's any hiccups along the way. The process, the posting closes on November 15th.
How many people would you want to interview on the 19th?
On the 19th, we will probably, Dr. Pearson, Hugo, and I will screen the candidate, the 16 plus candidates, and we'll probably interview, probably bring it down to about 7 to 8 candidates. And then from 7 to 8 candidates, the committee will narrow it down to approximately 4 candidates. And then from 4 candidates, we'll narrow it down to 1 or 2 candidates for the board to interview.
I think what I'd like to do is, we have to talk about it. What I'd like to do is make a motion at this time to add to the agenda new item 6A, which is Personnel Search Committee for the RES Principal Search. Do you have a second for that motion? Stephanie? All in favor? Thank you. That brings us immediately to that item. And the reason I raised that is because of the transition, the way the schedule is going. What I'd like to do is look for a motion to amend the charge of the Personnel Search Committee and the composition of the Personnel Search Committee to include the 4 departing members of the committee, and to specifically expand the committee to be a committee of the whole of the Reading Board of Education, and also to include John Riley, Colleen Pilato, Chris Hawker, and Heather Whaley, so that they can be part of that process and bring an institutional memory to assist our new board members.
This reminds me of when my husband would sign me up to chaperone field trips.
This is called, you thought you were out, but I pulled you back in. So,
Godfather.
do I have that motion at least for discussion?
Do you need this back?
Do I have that motion for discussion? Thank you. You might have a vote. Second. Any discussion on that? Any concern about that? So I know we had talked about trying to ensure that we can do this process with the currently proposed board, because there's a lot of benefit to all the work that we've done together in these searches.
One other thing that we discussed, is this your preferred way to do it, to screen the 16 down to 7, down to 4? Because I think we talked, is that your preferred
I
way?
think did we talk about this at the last meeting?
Yeah.
A little bit.
I think it was
We held a
a
non-meeting.
non-meeting.
Oh,
But,
right,
but,
okay.
but we also discussed that there were times when the superintendent would bring to the board 3 candidates that were interviewed. And then we would just choose which of those 3.
Okay.
If,
See,
it's up to you, that's up to you, I think.
I think, I think sometimes it really depends on, I've had situations before where you have a structure like this, where there are, there's a committee, there's a first round, a second round, and a third round, and usually the board is the third round. I recall years ago where we brought 2 candidates to the board because we said we'd bring 2 candidates to the board. But just think about this for a second. From my perspective, there was really only one candidate, one strong, top-notch candidate. One candidate and a candidate we're only bringing because we said we'd bring 2 candidates. And the board chose the candidate that I thought was the weaker candidate. I'm not going to say it doesn't need to say which district, but so I guess it really depends on the candidate pool and how strong that candidate pool is, and by the time you get through the process, do you have 3 strong candidates or 2 strong candidates or 1 strong candidate? And so it's I don't have an answer. It's an interesting question. I think it's guided a little bit by the committees before and what the candidate pool looks like.
Well, what I'm hearing, not to overly complicate this, is that you're trying to make it possible to have that institutional knowledge maintained through the transition process.
Correct.
You obviously can't, you can't conscript us.
Right.
Right, but to the extent that it might be useful to have that input, that's what you're looking for, is the ability to do that, and then you can work out the details.
Correct. The Personnel Search Committee was formed as a committee of the whole of the Board of Education, which would be sort of ex officio as to the members of the board that's seated. And so to the extent there's a turnover, I think that there's some benefit to granting the authority to appoint immediate past board members to that role.
We've also had, the last time I was involved in the principal search for RES, the committee was board members, PTA leaders, and teachers. So I don't know if that provides the, adequate
Yeah, there's adequate
institutional knowledge and
yeah.
maybe even perhaps more appropriate, knowing the culture of the school. Just throwing that out there.
Yes.
And it was more loosely defined by us, or maybe not at all defined by us. It was Tom that just like boom selected a cross section that came to the interview, and it was very helpful to hear all those very diverse opinions on who was there. The question I was going to ask you before, Chris, is so you're not precluding the new members?
No.
So it's going to be the board, including the new members, and also the floor that you've conscripted. Invited, excuse me, sorry.
But
Right.
You packed the board.
Yeah, but to reinforce it, this is, what you're looking for is the ability to do that.
Correct.
Okay.
And to the extent we get to that phase in the process, I don't want to be limited by the fact that the committee was formed to be exclusively members of the Board of Education, because it might come to a point.
But that's all, you haven't prescribed every step of the process.
Not
You're just
even
saying that,
remotely. No.
it might be helpful to have a few of us.
Correct. If we want to convene a personnel search committee meeting, I'd like the ability to name you guys to that committee to have that conversation.
I think that's fine.
And when it comes to, gets right down to, selection and making a recommendation, is that how it's going to, board's going to make a recommendation to Jason, Jason's going to make a recommendation to us that we affirm, not exactly sure, but what about if there's voting?
Well, typically, the superintendent makes a recommendation, brings 2 candidates, 3 candidates to you, and says, these are the candidates I'm recommending. At that point, yeah, you're going to have to appoint someone. That's according to your policy.
And would they?
You mean in the context of the theoretically expanded personnel search committee?
Yeah.
We're talking about votes. I mean, I'm happy to take it as, operating under the assumption or the expectation that the 4 non-board members of the committee would be purely advisory at that point.
Sounds good.
But when we did it, when we hired,
In the past.
in the past, yeah, we hired in the past, the teachers who were on the search committee and the PTA members also had a vote.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, they did. So I mean, in a sense, we could be serving as community members.
Right, or does the committee make a recommendation to the board, and then the board makes a decision on the committee recommendation?
It's ultimately the sitting boards.
I thought it was the superintendent making the decision. I thought the superintendent, we hired the superintendent hires. Isn't that ultimately?
Yeah, so I know exactly what you're talking about, and I
Yeah.
remember taking the vote, and I remember that we voted not in a way that Tom was expecting. He brought the candidates there, and I think he was at peace with all 3.
Yeah.
He thought it was gonna be A, and it ended up being B.
Yeah.
Yeah, only you can vote at the end.
Right.
How we get to that process, I would prefer it to be led by the superintendent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
I would kind of expect you to put your finger on one.
Yeah.
So, I don't know,
I don't want to
It-
vote. I'll
if
participate.
it's just the board that's voting,
Yeah.
makes sense to me. But I think it's a great idea, you know, to have an
Are you
institutional
not
memory in
going
the
to
room.
include teachers in that then? Are you not going to
I
have?
think Dr. McKinnon's sort of outline and plan would include those sort of stakeholder interviews. I'm talking about from a board
Before it
governance
gets to us.
perspective.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Before it gets to us.
Yes, the first round and the second round is a committee of teachers, PTA,
Right.
parents, and administration. So,
That sounds good.
that work gets done.
Yeah.
And then finally, you have 1 or 2 candidates at the end.
I just think that there's value in overwhelming the new board of having
Yeah.
folks who have that governance experience. To,
Yeah, I look forward to that conversation.
Yeah.
So should the motion include as, on an advisory basis?
Maybe the motion ought to be that the personnel search committee may be expanded and the chair may appoint immediate past members of the board on an advisory basis to the personnel search committee.
I think that's what I heard the first time.
That's exactly what I
Yeah.
heard the first time.
A lot of words.
For a second. Any further discussion on this proposal? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Brings us to what is now 6B, which is district and school goals framework. Dr.
Secretary.
Good night.
You do? You're a pro.
Okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about our district and school goals framework. If you recall, last month we presented to you a standardized test information report, and during that report we highlighted our Smarter Balance test scores in particular. And we talked a little bit about, these are our scores over the last 5 years. These are our scores from last year. You'll notice that our ELA declined approximately 5%. Our math scores declined approximately 10%. And we had a reference point to the DERG average. And in some places we declined commensurate to the DERG average in certain areas. And so we went through those data with you. And we said that tonight we would follow up with a follow-up presentation that was focused more on formative assessment and kind of our next steps moving forward. I haven't had the time that I would have liked to have had with the administrators and the teachers during the last 3-4 weeks to really look at some of those formative assessments. So we thought we would present more of what does the framework look like rather than getting too granular into what are the specific goals. So that's what I wanted to highlight tonight. I think, and the other thing I'll say is that if you recall, during our meeting last week, I talked about, what are the things that 5 rapidly improving schools do, and they focus on the future, they focus on student achievement, they focus on growth, instructional strategies, and they define how we provide professional development for our teachers. And so you'll see those as important elements in our framework. And so a framework will allow us to be purpose-driven, goal-oriented, and focused on strategies. And generally there are 4 parts. We can articulate the direction that we're going. I'll talk to you a little bit about kind of the 4 standards or the 4 priorities. Any good framework has a place to define metrics. So you'll see metrics there. And then you'll also see a place for where we can identify who's responsible for what particular action step that might help us achieve a particular goal. So you'll see that as well. This is a framework, a strategic operating plan framework that I think really allows us to look at data and links together the mission and vision of a district, a theory of action, identifies the relationship between priorities in a district and measurable goals, helps define what initiatives that we currently have in place, like a new math program, for example, and then also defines action steps. It's a little bit hard to see, but the top part of that framework is really the joint responsibility of the leadership and the board, and the bottom part of that framework is really the responsibility of the leadership and the schools. But generally, that's a framework that really lends itself to a greater success. And really, the key point here is that we always talk about data, but using data rarely leads to action if it's not connected to a framework of strategies. And just to say it another way, if you're a farmer, right, in town, and you have a pig, measuring the pig is not going to make it fatter, right? So in other words, focusing on data isn't necessarily going to do anything unless it's connected to a framework of strategies. And so this is an example of a framework that we need to pay attention to. So what are the key components of the framework? Well, identifying a series of priorities. What are the 4 or 5 general areas that we need to focus on? Underneath those priorities, you need to have some goals that are very specific and measurable. Related to those goals, there needs to be a series of action steps. And then you need to define how the leadership is engaging in those action steps and the metrics they're using to measure results. Okay, so that's, again, key part of the framework. Now, this is an area that I really need time to talk with our administrators about. And I haven't had that time as of yet. I look back at the prior work that the district has done, and it's excellent work, and I can see a through line through some of the strategies that you've done in the past, like critical thinking, high order thinking, student engagement, transfer of learning, and so on. And I can see that there's some coherence there. And so part of what the framework does is it identifies priority areas and makes sure that we're all working together towards those areas. So the areas that I think should be in those buckets are high impact instructional strategies. I talked a little bit about those last week. I'm going to talk a lot more about them before the year is out. Any good framework and priority needs to identify how we're improving student learning outcomes. That's obviously an important part. The district identified the idea of transfer, which is how students learn along a continuum from surface understanding to deeper understanding to more transfer, which is their ability to apply and generalize their skills that they're learning in the classrooms to other areas. So that's really important. And Colleen, you mentioned this at the top of the meeting. Social emotional learning is absolutely critical not just for our staff, because we need to support them as students are coming back to the classroom, but our students are coming back to us more needy after the pandemic, and we really need to make sure we have goals for them as well. So having an area for next year, for this year, focusing on social emotional learning, I think is critical. And what we're hearing from our principals is that there are behaviors that we're seeing in our students, like behaviors at the high school, for example, where students are not so much less engaged, but they're more distracted. Their behaviors you don't normally see that they're accustomed to. So, we do see an impact that, and it's reflected in some of the data as well. So if you ask, how do you select these data and these priority areas? Well, sometimes it's just you have to do the work. And by doing the work, you can identify the areas, right? So I love this quote by Mark Twain: if you hold a cat by the tail, you learn things you cannot learn any other way. We are learning that as students come back to us, they do need more support in the area of social emotional learning, right? But we select areas that are research tested. We try to avoid initiatives and fads in education because there are always things that are coming along, and we need to pay close attention to selecting strategies that are validated by research. And so that's a core of the high impact instructional strategies that I was talking about. We need to select priority areas that are always focused on the instructional care core, which is the relationship between teachers learning and the content that they're teaching. We need to make sure that our priorities try to do few things deeply, and that those things are interrelated and they add up to the bigger picture. And this is the most important part at the bottom. And it gets back to the idea of what I was saying before, which is the idea that using data rarely leads to action if it's not connected to a framework of strategies. Well, unless your plan is really understood and discussed by teachers, it's not going to go anywhere. And that's the piece that I feel like I'm lacking at the moment. We're 30 days in, I'm 35 days in. And so I have to be really careful about identifying, here are the priority areas, let's go. Because you really need buy-in. It's one of the most important things. So one of my most immediate strategies is to get into classrooms and to talk to teachers about their priority areas, to talk to leaders about the work that they're doing, the work they did yesterday that you heard the administrator talk about, and the work that Dr. Pearson Hugo has been doing over the past decade, and making sure that we can connect those pieces plus move forward. So that's a really important part, is having conversations, and so that teachers can understand their work and support the strategies. So this is completely impossible to see. And I apologize for that, but basically it's a grid, and it identifies those 4 areas, so high impact instructional strategies, student outcomes, the transfer of learning, social emotional learning, and this is actually a spreadsheet, a Google spreadsheet, and down the bottom of the spreadsheet are tabs, and each tab breaks the spreadsheet and the priority areas into certain areas, right? So there's goals, and next to goals are action steps, and next to action steps are how you're going to actually implement those action steps and when you're doing them. So you can actually identify what during department chair meetings and during faculty meetings, how are you actually doing this work and when are you doing it? Identifying professional development, and also developing our leadership practices. So this is kind of the framework. This is the meat and potatoes of the framework and how it all fits together. And I'm actually glad that you can't see it, because I really do need to show it to teachers first. But I will come back and show you and kind of open up the hood, I would say the bonnet, and look under there, and I'll show you the engine at some point when I talk to the teachers about it. And so the next key steps is to look at these priority areas, to build understanding with faculty, to identify the priority areas, and then to develop the goals and the action steps related to the priority areas, and then provide training. And so, getting back to kind of why we're having this conversation, we identified some metrics and some student achievement, Now we need to identify a coherent plan and action steps to address those areas of strength and weakness and move forward together. And if we all move forward together, operating in the same areas, then we're going to spin that cog in the wheel that I talked about that we should be spinning last week. All right, so that's kind of an update of kind of what's on my mind right now and what we're focusing on in terms of a district and school framework. Some of this stuff will become part of my superintendent evaluation and my goals. We haven't gotten there yet. And it will also be able to, it will link and tie all the work that we're doing together.
Are you related to Colleen?
I was just gonna say, I was just thinking, like, where has this guy been? This is very serendipitous that I'll sit there. Do you have a business degree?
Do I have a business degree?
Uh-huh. Or
No.
did you work in like corporate, like?
No, well, you know, other than the experience of being a, you know, superintendent and budgeting and so on.
I love this.
Oh, good.
Do you?
Yeah, you can't see it.
No, I know what it says. And I like right now, there's nothing written in it.
Right.
The promise of
you know,
filling those blanks.
And you know, there were some things written in it today that I met with Stephanie. We had a meeting with administrators, and I'm kind of going through some of this stuff. And Stephanie counseled me and said, you know, we need to do more work with teachers and leaders in this area before you get into the weeds with the board, right? That's exactly what you said. And so, and I trust what she's saying. And so it's about the buy-in, getting everyone moving forward.
I think that's very wise. Based on feedback that we've gotten, I think that's excellent wisdom to share about how we are as an organization. Because I can remember a previous person in your role saying he felt like he had his foot on the gas and the brake at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that there is an element of that, right? You want to produce a result, but you need to get your team
That's right.
on board.
Yeah, it's very true. And I think it's partly because I started in September rather than July. And it's partly because of, you know, the cog in the wheel is spinning, but I need to turn this cog rather than that cog. So, and it's also partly because during our meeting today, we had to close the high school.
You had to leave.
Right.
I mean, I can say that while Dr. McKinnon is sharing the framework, and in some ways without content, it's you're not distracted by content, right? You can really just take that 10,000-foot view. But there is content, right? So we have discussed each element of this as a leadership team and how it links to the work that we started last year, continued over the summer before Dr. McKinnon joined us, and now this is just sort of the next logical step. So there is very, very much a through line, and each one of the schools is engrossed in their school level goal work. You know that our teachers have been developing their student learning objectives. So the absence of information in each cell does not mean that we're not doing goal work.
I think it would be a mistake to bring us that information because someone would say, I'd like to know more about that line. Can you bring us a report? And then someone's stuck doing a report and that person even asked it, which happens sometimes.
Okay.
I love this. I'm with Colleen. I think that's really helpful in like outlining what's the board's role and what's the school's role, and also like a way to measure progress. I'm not seeing it. That's great.
Yeah.
You hinted a couple of times that you're having a hard time getting into the classroom and getting rolling on this, or I kind of got that feeling. Is that true? Is that like a, you know, I just started in September thing? Is there something else going on? Are you in emergency mode with water leaks or?
I think it's a combination. You know, I'll be honest. I think it's a combination of things. One is when you generally start in a role like this, you start July 1, and so you have an on-ramp to get onto the highway and then to get going and to meet lots of people and to start talking and understanding the work they're doing, validating the work, plus introducing your own ideas. I think starting in September is part of that. I think the other part of it is not having a business manager for a period of time, the transition of, a business manager, kind of a gap, and then another business manager coming in. It's another part of it. And I think, and then honestly, the third part of it is just, again, that cog in the wheel, if you remember that, the board cog, and that how the cadence of having a meeting every week with the board takes a lot of preparation work. And so you are spending a lot of time getting ready for this meeting, but I'm also getting ready for the meeting next week and the meeting next week and so on. So there's a lot of work that keeps you moving in that direction. You obviously, you just need to look at your team, your central office team, your leadership team, identify what their strengths are, and put your strongest people focused on what's the most important thing. Now, if I was a business person, I had an MBA, and it would be great if you focused me towards the finances. Listen, I can, of course, do each of those things in pieces, but our strength is teaching and learning in a classroom, because we can walk into a classroom and say, this is a priority area, this is where we need to focus our time. We could meet with the administrators and we could help provide leadership to them in order to improve certain areas. And I was saying during the Region 9, the Tri-Board meeting last week, you have incredible educators in this district, and it's just a matter of fine-tuning a little bit and getting them all moving in the right direction, whether tuning into the right frequency or turning that gear a little bit. But the teachers here are so talented, and so are the leaders. You just need that synergy, everyone moving in the right direction.
The reason why I asked the question was just because I remember back to the interview, and I had the vision of you in the classroom, observing the teachers and effectively steering kind of the way we do things by, visiting with everybody. So I'm looking forward to you being able to do that. I want to make sure it sounds like we have somebody sitting in the seat now, and if we can plug the leaks in the roof, if you can spend some time with the teachers, I'm looking forward to hearing you tell us about how that's going.
Yeah, and that is that kind of that leadership arrow, that piece there, where once we have the priorities, the goals, and the action steps, imagine as a team, we're all walking through schools together, and we're looking through a common lens at what's happening in our classroom, and then having conversations about what's happening in our classroom. That is how you change the culture. And I love this book by Daniel Boyle called The Culture Code, and he talks about what really successful organizations do and why they're successful. So that would be a great book study for us to read. But it's the idea of having a clear set of priorities, criteria to measure the priorities, and then having conversations about the work, and everyone talks the same language. It's really important.
I think this is great, and I think that it's a really good framework that this board and future boards sort of look to as a goal setting, goal reviewing, ROI kind of framework to understand where we're going, why we're going, what we're trying to achieve. I know Dr. McMorrin used to refer to things as more better goals, as in what is our goal for test scores to be more better, and that is so amorphous that you can never really get your hands around what we're trying to do or why. And I think this has the benefit of working well with getting the buy-in of teachers, the buy-in of administrators to pull in a common direction, and also help us from a community relations perspective to demonstrate here's what you're investing in, here's where we're going, here's why. And it all sort of works in a very positive way. So I think that it's a noble effort, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes.
And the one other piece that I believe has been missing for us, unless I'm forgetting it, is the follow-up. Like, this is like a conversation that we have in October or November of setting goals, and then it's just, that conversation ends there. And the way I would envision goals being used is that it's driving action plans with timelines that are regularly revisited, and you check in with your progress. And to have that as a regular part of the conversation, I think, I don't think we've done a great job at that in the past. It was was more like, we're gonna set our growth target for some standardized test, and then the next year or something, we talk about how we did rather than on a more frequent, regular basis.
Yeah, so embedded in our framework, which you couldn't read, talks about, the goals, the priorities, the goals, the action steps, measures of success that had targets that you wanted to achieve, mid-year reflection points, and kind of progress monitoring. And so,
I saw it there, I love it.
yeah, so that's in there, and that's kind of under the hood a little bit, right? So there's pieces that we keep to ourselves, not because we're not being transparent with you, just because, we are making the sausage, right? And we're doing that work. And there are parts of the plan that I will share with you as progress, as part of this is the superintendent's goals, this is a mid-year evaluation, this is where we are, right? So you will receive that along the way as well. And yeah, that's important.
Questions or comments? Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Before we move to item 7, can I take a step back on this person search committee potential dates?
What's the question?
It's just when are they? Yeah, I got it down November 19th, 30th, December 7th.
November 30th? 19, 20,
That's my
7.
50th birthday. I will help you.
Oh my gosh, I think I'm gonna be done wrong.
They move the dates, but they don't have to be the dates. We just picked out, we've got to reach out to committee members and see whether people are.
Okay.
So it's not locked.
Nothing is locked in at the moment.
The only thing that's really locked in is December 7th,
Okay.
which is your board meeting.
Right.
And, whether you want to have a special meeting or a non-meeting before the board meeting, there are a couple of things you could do.
Yeah, but the ideal timeline is to be appointing at our meeting next month, please.
And there's currently a joint curriculum committee meeting before the December board meeting, just.
6:30.
Yes.
There will be no further business. Look for a motion to adjourn.
I would like to make that motion.
We'll move.
I want to second that one.
John, will second that motion. All in favor?
Yay!
We are adjourned at 9:12 p.m. 4 years.
That's good.
Picture of
That's
it.
a wrap.
It's a lovely
That's
design.
nice.
Yeah.
That's a wrap.
It really is.
So we need a special, way better than that.
It really is nice.